Our next guest has been visiting children in custody at the southern border for 12 years. She says that she has never seen conditions as bad as what she saw there last week. That is when the Trump administration was in federal court arguing that they can provide safe and sanitary conditions for the children without providing the children with soap or toothbrushes or toothpaste, and that it is perfectly safe and sanitary to sleep on cement floors where so many of the children are now forced to sleep.
It's within everybody's common understanding that, if you don't have a toothbrush, if you don't have soap, if you don't have a blanket, it's not safe and sanitary. Well, wouldn't everybody agree to that? Do you agree to that?
Well, I think there's fair reason to find that those things may be part of safe and sanitary.
Maybe are a part. What do you say maybe? You mean there are circumstances when a person doesn't need to have a toothbrush, toothpaste, and soap for days?
Well, I think in CBP custody, it's frequently intended to be much shorter term. So it may be that for a shorter term stay in CBP custody that some of those things may not be required.
But they are not short-term stays. Many of the children are left in those conditions for weeks. Alora Mukherjee is one of the lawyers who got inside and saw the children. She told the New York Times, there is a stench. The overwhelming majority of children have not bathed since they crossed the border. Joining our discussion now is Alora Mukherjee. She's the director of the Immigrants' Rights Clinic at the Columbia School of Law. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You were there last week.
I was.
Seeing exactly what has been reported in all the most recent reports. And tell us the ages of the children you met with and interviewed.
I met with children ranging between the age of 5 months to 17 years old. On Monday morning, when we arrived at the facility, there were more than 350 children detained there in an adult holding facility that was designed for just over 100. The children who we interviewed last week were dirty, hungry, sick, scared, and many of them had been detained for days on end, for weeks on end, some nearly a month. Many of the children had been held incommunicado without an opportunity to call their loved ones, and their loved ones have no idea where they are and how to get their beloved children back. Nearly every child in that facility has family members in the United States who are eager to get their children back, and the children want to be with their loved ones too. But the length of detention has just been too long. There is a federal law that was passed unanimously by both houses and signed by President George W. Bush, which provides for detention in Customs and Border Protection facilities for children for not longer than 72 hours.
Tell us about the infants. You met one child who's 5 months old. What do you do? How do you interview a 5-month-old child?
The 5-month-old child was accompanied by her teenage mom. The child was extremely dirty, as was her mother. The child and the mother both had bodily fluids on their clothing, nasal mucus. The mother had breast milk stains all over her shirt. They had crossed the border a significant time beforehand and had not showered or bathed in days. There's also no way for the children detained there to wash their clothing and put on clean changes of clothes. When I interview children in detention facilities, I try to sit closer to them so that I can help to build rapport while we're talking about extremely sensitive and traumatic information. And with some of the children who I met last week, that was hard to do because of the stench emanating from them.
There are other infants who are apparently not accompanied and are being cared for by other children who get that assignment. They either volunteer for it, or sometimes the guards are suggesting, why don't you take care of that infant?
That's exactly right. So we heard reports of children as young as 6 months old, 1 year old, 2 years old, 3 years old, who are being cared for by children unrelated to them in these holding cells and in these pens. And when I say the children are older than them, we're talking about children who are 7 years old, 8 years old, 9 years old. They're being ordered by the guards to care for the younger children. And it leads to all the problems you can imagine because these young children are not equipped to take care of toddlers. One of my colleagues, Warren Binford, was interviewing an 8-year-old child who was tasked with caring for a 2-year-old. And when Warren asked whether the 2-year-old needed diapers, the 8-year-old said no, and the 2-year-old promptly peed on the chair that the child was sitting on. These are not safe and sanitary conditions. There was an influenza outbreak at the facility. Flu and lice were spreading. The children don't have access to an ability to wash their hands with soap. Most of the children who I spoke with had not brushed their teeth once for weeks on end.
And the information that you and other lawyers are gathering is what is being brought into those courtrooms where we're seeing that kind of argument, the Trump administration defending this and saying to be sanitary, you don't need soap. And obviously, those 3 appeals court judges had never heard anyone say anything like that before.
That's exactly right. I would invite those DOJ lawyers to go into the facility at Clint and other CBP facilities where adults and children are being held in dangerous, overcrowding conditions without access to soap, toothbrushes, clean clothes, showers, and invite them to then consider whether these facilities meet the safe and sanitary requirements.
They knew you were coming. They had 3 weeks warning that you were coming. The people working on site all of them had a minimum of a week's knowledge that you were coming. So there's reason to believe that they dressed the place up as best they could, that 3 weeks ago it could have looked much worse even.
That's exactly right. Some of the children told us that during the days we were there last week, they were allowed to make their first phone calls. During the days we were there last week, they got their first shower. They got their first toothbrush. They got a chance to go outside for the first time. I spoke with many children who had not been outside once during their detention at Clint. And the 3 children who I spoke with who reported outdoor opportunities told me that they couldn't bear to bring themselves to play because they were trying to conserve their energy to stay alive. Nearly every child I spoke with reported that they were hungry because children are given the same ration of food on the same size tray, regardless of if they are 1 year old or 17 years old or a teenage mother who's breastfeeding and has higher caloric needs.
Laura, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank
really
you
appreciate
so
it.
much.
And please come back with more reporting on what you find there. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.